Hello, story lovers, and welcome back to my channel, Tales with Tasha. Turn out the lights, find yourself a cushion to hide behind, and get ready for the chilling tale of a curse, a ghost, a mummy, and a demon. Your spine will be tingled and your nerves jittered. I am Tasha, and I am a storyteller. I hope you will enjoy the stories on my channel as much as I do. Please let me know what you think in the comments. Subscribe to never miss one of my vids and hit that like button if you enjoy the story. Thank you, lovelies. The story this week is again what I would define as PG-ish. It has ghostly horror, so it's not for the faint of heart, but there is nothing graphic. Don't forget to stay right to the end for my diva cats doing their beautiful poses for my camera. They will be most sad otherwise, and we can't have sad kitties, can we? With that being said, make sure you're sitting comfortably, and let's jump right on in. Looking for Luticia, The Perils of Ghost Hunting by Natasha Duncan Drake. Lucy liked Darling Manor less and less the longer she stayed. It was going to make another great episode for the ghost hunting loving public, but she was on the edge of not caring. What with their host having to leave suddenly, still their psychic's reaction to the locked room all the legends were about, Lucy's own little accident, and the way the whole place gave her the heebie-jeebies in the extreme, she doubted she was going to get any sleep. It had been a long day. They had all the footage they needed in the can so far, so it was a good shoot, but Syl hadn't reappeared all evening, and that set Lucy on edge even more. However, when her head touched the pillow, she dropped right off. She had no idea how much longer it was when a noise woke her. After staying in a large number of old houses, she knew they made creaks and groans, so she turned over prepared to go back to sleep. Only that was when she saw the door. The sound had been the old lock turning, and the door itself was slowly opening. Her sleep-addled brain jumped over all the possible rational explanations and went straight for ghost. Her heart leapt into her throat and she froze. It was like a scene from any classic horror film as the door's hinges gave a pathetic squeak. She would have laughed if she hadn't felt like crying. When the door opened enough to reveal the perfectly ordinary silhouette of a woman in a nightdress, Lucy almost did cry, but with relief. The moonlight from the window in the hall outside her room framed the woman nicely as she stepped inside. It was only as her guest glided towards the bed that Lucy realised she was pretty sure none of the crew wore old-fashioned nightgowns. In a last-ditch bid for sanity, Lucy lunged for the bedside light. She found herself looking at a woman she had never seen before, in a nightgown with lacy ruffles. The stranger had a pale face, surrounded by very old-fashioned-looking blonde ringlets. Someone had to be playing a joke on her, and not a very good one at that. For a second, the woman just blinked at her. "Who the hell are you, and what are you doing in my room?" The woman's eyes opened a little in shock, but she quickly composed herself. "I am Luticia Franklin," she said simply, in a refined English accent. "And I need your help." "Really? Luticia? Is that the best whoever came up with this can do?" Lucy demanded. It couldn't have been one of the crew who arranged this, because they knew how important the first night's footage could be. That meant someone local, and that pissed Lucy right off. "While I can understand your skepticism," Luticia said, "I'm afraid it happens to be true. My family is cursed, and you, Miss Williams, are the first ray of hope in far too many years." "Look, I really don't care what game you're playing," Lucy replied. "Just leave the way you came and we can forget the whole thing. But if you wreck our filming for tonight, my production company will delight in pursuing you for lost..." Before she could finish what she was saying, Luticia stepped forward and placed her hand over where Lucy's was still on the bedside table. She gasped as ice ran up her arm. A feeling of wrongness accompanied the cold, and Lucy snatched her hand back without even thinking. The fear came crashing back like a ton of bricks. "I'm sorry," Luticia said, standing back once more. "I do not wish to frighten you. I beg you to help me." "What do you want?" Lucy asked, voice barely willing to work. "I am trapped," Luticia told her. "I knew I was dying, and after my death I planned to confront the evil in this house. But I was ill prepared for my relatives refusing to obey my wishes. It took so much of my will to convince them that I was confined to my room before I was able to do that which I had planned for." "Then how are you here now?" Lucy knew the explanation had a logical hole. "Your blood on the lock crossed the boundary," Luticia said, "and your gifts call to me." "What gifts?" "You are open to the world of spirits," Luticia said. "I don't have a psychic bone in my body," Lucy protested. "But you do," her companion insisted, "for I am here. The more one is exposed to such things, the more sensitive one of your talents will become." Lucy didn't believe it in the slightest, but she was too on edge to say so. "You still haven't told me what you want," she said. "To open my door." "But I don't have the keys." "I know where they are. I will show you." "Then what?" "When I am free, I will face the evil that has lurked in this house for centuries." Luticia sounded so sincere, but Lucy hesitated. Her instincts were screaming danger at her. "How do I know you weren't shut in there for a good reason?" she asked. "Ask your heart," Luticia said, "and if you decide to help me, come to my door. I will show you where to find the keys from there." Even before the ghost was finished speaking, Lucy realized she no longer looked like a solid person. "You know," she said as she faded, "I was almost a Lucy. My mother wanted that name, but my father wished for me to be called Luticia. So they compromised and decided that Luticia sounded a fair name." Then she was gone. Lucy sat staring at where she had been, a little voice at the back of her mind wondering how much of that the cameras had caught. Lucy sat in her bed staring at nothing for a long time. She knew it would be safer to go back to sleep. If she did, tomorrow they would continue their investigation and then leave. It would be easy. Luticia was trapped, so all they would get from her was maybe a little party trick or two, like in the session with Syl earlier. And if there really was an evil presence, it hadn't shown itself yet. It was probably hiding, not interested in guests, only the family. It would have been sensible to lie back down and forget the whole thing. Of course, no one had ever accused Lucy of being particularly sensible. She chased ghosts for a living, after all. She did what Luticia had told her. She searched her heart, and it finally dawned on her that she believed the ghost. Pushing the covers back, she threw on a large jumper she always packed for cold old houses over her pajamas, grabbed her trusty torch and headed out the door. How she was going to explain the footage in the morning she had no idea, but there were more important things than ratings. As soon as she stopped in front of the locked door, she felt the same cold she had done when Luticia touched her. "The pot on the hall table," Luticia's voice whispered in her mind. "Where are you?" Lucy asked, looking round for the ghost. "Manifesting requires a great deal of energy. I cannot afford to waste any more. Not with what is coming." Goosebumps rose all across Lucy's skin. The disembodied voice that seemed to come from her own head was almost worse than an actual apparition. "Isn't that pot rather delicate?" she asked, and she knew she was procrastinating, but she couldn't help it. "It can only be broken by deliberate intent," Luticia told her. "The keys are sealed inside. Lift it from the table and smash it. It is the only way." "Are you sure?" "Yes." That was it then, the last delaying tactic her mind could come up with. "Please," Luticia said. "Okay," Lucy said quietly. She stepped up to the table, put her torch down and picked up the porcelain vessel, pausing as she wondered what the hell she was thinking yet again. "Lucy, what are you doing?" She almost dropped it anyway at the familiar voice. Turning, she saw Syl coming down the corridor. "Freeing Luticia," she said. "The keys are in here," she added. "What? How do you know?" "She came to me. When I cut myself on the door, it gave her a connection." Syl all but scowled at that. "Luce, this is dangerous," Syl said, walking right up to her. "There is evil in this house. I can feel it. It could be her." "It's not," she replied. "She's trying to fight the evil, but it trapped her in that room." She gestured at the door with both hand and pot. "If she's made a connection with you, how do you know?" Syl asked. "The wrongness permeates everything here. I've spent all night trying to get through it." "Not really a migraine, then?" "Oh, definitely a migraine, but that doesn't mean I don't have to still do my job." "What do you mean?" "I'm a medium, Luce. I might go on TV and feel out residual entities for entertainment, but my job is to help trapped spirits move on when I can. There is a trapped spirit here, but there is also a lot of rage and something evil. I know I always say that ghosts can't hurt you, but that's the sanitized version for TV. Some of them can, and Luticia might be the evil." Lucy looked at the vase and then at the door. "She's not," she said. "Can you be sure? Look, wait until we're finished here. I'll even stay on here to make sure everything is done for her that it's possible to do. I'll do a full clearing if that's what it takes. Just don't do anything hasty." That cold feeling of dread in Lucy's stomach was growing again, but with it came a tentative instinct. "It has to be now," she said. "It knows, the evil knows, it knew as soon as I picked this up." Syl looked at her then, really looked at her. "So, you're finally waking up," he said. "I am a little bit psychic then?" she asked. He nodded. "You've always picked up on things most people don't. You just never seem to consciously realize it. I didn't want to frighten you off by mentioning anything." "Then can you trust my instincts now?" Lucy asked. She watched Syl's face carefully as he considered her request. When he nodded again, part of the tight feeling in her chest released a little. Taking the pot, she held it over an uncarpeted section of the landing and let it go. The fragile porcelain shattered with an echoing crack the moment it hit the floor. Syl picked up her torch from the table and shone it down on the pieces. There, sitting amongst the shards, were 3 keys. They looked like new. Just like Lucy knew the evil had known the moment she touched the pot, she could feel that it knew the keys had been found. The sense of urgency forced her on, and she crouched down quickly, picking up the keys and stepping over to the door. Cold flowed over her from head to foot, and the tightness in her chest returned, becoming painful. She gasped as it became hard to breathe. "Lucy?" "I'm all right," she said, refusing to back down. Working as fast as her fingers would let her, she took the first key and tried it in the bottom lock. It couldn't turn, so she went on. The second lock gave an overly loud click, the bar it was holding closed, springing open as it proved to be a match. She took a huge breath as the action freed something up in her chest as well. Spurred on, she quickly repeated the process with the second and third keys. Each time there was the overly loud click, as if more than a simple lock was releasing, and the metal bars sprung back as if pulled by an invisible hand. As the last did, so flame shot out of the door. Lucy was not quick enough to step back. She shied away, but the flames reached for her. But they didn't burn. They flared with blues and purples for a few seconds, leaving a black smudged design on the door before they then went out. It didn't really surprise her when the door swung inwards without her having to so much as touch it. "Oh," she heard from behind her. "Oh, I see." Lucy looked at Syl, and for the first time she was completely sure. She didn't know what he was sensing, but she knew that expression of righteous fury that was forming on Syl's face. They didn't need to speak. When she held out her hand, he gave her the torch and they walked into the room. The first thing that assailed her was the unpleasant smell, but given what she expected to find in the room which had been shut up for nearly 150 years, that wasn't surprising. The torch beam revealed a bookcase, dressing table, chairs and a four-poster bed, all of a well-to-do 19th century lady, and all spotless. It was as if time had stopped the moment the room was sealed. There wasn't a cobweb or a speck of dust to be seen. Nothing in the room looked old. Not until the torch reached the top of the bed. There on the perfect pillows, and under a perfect embroidered cover, was what could only be described as a modern mummy. It had to be Luticia. Her skin was light brown and shiny in places, like an old leather sofa's arms that had been polished. Her cheeks were sunken over perfect bone structure, but not withered like an ancient mummy. She even still looked on the world with perfectly preserved eyes, yellowed, but not shriveled or decayed. Her face was framed by the same ringlets Lucy had seen on her ghost, only whatever had been used to preserve her had stained them red. She was dressed in the old-fashioned nightgown, but where the sheets were pristine, the gown was mildewed and stained with age. "Luticia," Syl whispered reverently. Even as they watched, a light cloud formed above the mummy. It floated for a few moments before beginning to settle like mist on water, as it was slowly absorbed. "Lucy, we need to leave," Syl said, placing his hand on her shoulder as she watched the scene, enwrapped. It took an effort of will to drag her eyes away and look at him. "It's coming," he said. "Can't you feel it?" Lucy had been so focused that she hadn't even noticed, but now she did. She felt dirty, contaminated, as if she needed a shower, and it was coming from outside the room. "But Luticia..." "You've done your part," Syl said. "This is between them. We don't want to be here when they face each other." The sense of presence she had had since Luticia first spoke to her was muted now. Had been since the mist disappeared into the body. Lucy did not want to abandon her new friend. "We can't do anything in this," Syl insisted, taking her arm. "We need to get out of here." He sounded so earnest and just a bit scared, which is what got Lucy moving. It was the old instinct. If it rattled Syl, it was time to run. That reasoning had never pushed her in the wrong direction before, so she obeyed it now, even with her misgivings. She let Syl pull her back towards the door. "You shouldn't have done that." Fear slammed into her at the voice. It was so unassuming, so nice, and yet it shook her to the core. She could feel cold sweat on her skin as her heart thundered in her ears. Her fingers were suddenly clumsy and numb, the torch falling from her hand as she tried to raise it. For a second, all she could see was blackness as the torch went out and her eyes failed in the low, natural light. They were mine, and meddlers must be dealt with. The voice was cheerful, pleasant, and sounded so reasonable, except for the words. Reactions long buried, long controlled by modern humans, fired all through Lucy's body. The cold, then burning fire of adrenaline, the primitive depths of her brain, everything was screaming at her to run. The moon was out tonight, not bright, but shining through an ancient skylight to bathe part of the landing in a gentle white glow. As her eyes began to adjust, Lucy could see a figure beyond, a shadow in the darkness. She knew what she would see before that thing stepped into the moonlight, because it was no more human than the dog she could hear barking outside. It was Mo. The housekeeper looked the same as she had all evening, as she made jokes and small talk with everyone. She was just a little old lady, except the eyes. Where her eyes should have been, all there was shiny black. When she smiled, it was worse. Her smile was too wide, the teeth too long and needle-sharp, and all pretense was broken. "I will have to punish you," she said, as Lucy felt those black pits boring into her soul. "I had that troublesome shade right where I wanted her, and now I will have to put her back all over again." Mo took a step towards her, but then there was a shape between her and the demon. Latin phrases that Lucy half recognised from her classical education were falling from Syl's lips at speed. She hadn't even realised Syl knew Latin. She dared hardly breathe as Syl walked step by step towards Mo. She kept her eyes firmly on his back, needing the rock that his actions made him. Then it laughed. "Oh, shaman," Mo said, voice having gained a grating edge. "I warned you. Did you not like the pain I lashed into your mind? Must I repeat my warnings on your body?" Syl's litany faltered for just a moment. Lucy saw a shadow move out of the corner of her eye before Syl made a strangled, choking sound as his words died completely. To her horror, she saw his feet lifting off the ground. Then Mo stepped around, holding Syl aloft by the neck as if it took no effort at all. The tiny woman's body now had disproportionately long arms and legs, making her 7 feet tall. Mo looked as if a strong wind should have knocked her over, but the evil energy, the pure malice emanating from her, pushed at Lucy's skin like a physical thing. "Troublesome worm," Mo said, glaring up at Syl as he clawed at her hand. "Now you will die." "No!" The voice boomed around the whole landing. Lucy didn't want to take her eyes off the apparition in front of her, but she had to. That voice drew her. She wanted to scream. She so wanted to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. There in the doorway was Luticia Franklin in all her dead glory. Her straw-like curls hung around her sunken face like rusted ringlets, and her flat stare, through half-lidded eyes, was focused solely on Mo. So slowly that Lucy was sure she could hear the creaking. Luticia raised her right arm, with one bony finger pointing straight at the other supernatural creature. "You have trapped my family long enough," she declared, voice booming from the half-open but completely still mouth. "I am free, infernal beast, and now I have the power." Mo dropped Syl, who collapsed onto the hall carpet gasping for breath. Luticia took one step forward. Lucy whimpered, although she could not move. This was so far beyond anything she was prepared for. She knew Luticia was not the enemy, but the vision of the animated corpse was so dreadful it passed all logic. Her terror was so complete, every muscle in her body was frozen. "This can't be real," The little voice of reason kept chanting in the back of her mind, but at a fundamental level she knew it was. "You will feed on us no more, hellspawn," Luticia boomed. "I sever the pact. Leave this house." "You have no power over me," Mo shrieked back. "I know your name." Somehow Mo became even more hideous at that. Her neck grew like her arms and legs, leaving her head bobbing at a grotesque angle. Her eyes bulged out, and her fingers became long, lethal-looking claws. "You lie!" "You know it's true. You brought power to this house. You infused it with the soul of each generation so you could feed off us. I saw you and recognized you while on my sickbed, and I prepared for you. You locked me away behind that door before I could gather myself after my death, because you fear me. Leave this house, child of evil, or I will name you." Every word reverberated through Lucy, shaking her very soul. Stumbling back, she hit the wall and slowly slid down it. "You dare not! My name would bring this house down." "And you would be destroyed. My family will be free." Luticia took another stilted step, her stiff body wobbling forward like a mannequin. "Moll," the ground shook. "No!" Mo screamed, cowering down. "Then go. This is your final warning. I protect this house now." With a wail that turned Lucy's blood to ice, Mo began to shrink, like air being released from an old balloon. Her skin wrinkled even more, turning grey, then black. Soon there were no features of a human left at all as she became the twisted, shrunken thing, voice climbing higher and higher as she began to fade away. Tears prickled Lucy's eyes as she slammed her hands over her ears, unable to scream her own pain away. The noise was so loud, her eardrums wanted to explode. Then, just like that, it was gone. Where Mo had been, there was nothing. It could almost have been a horrible nightmare. But Luticia was still standing there. "It is done," she said, and lowered her arm back to her side. Much to Lucy's horror, the mummy turned on teetering steps and looked directly at her. "Thank you," she said in that terrible booming voice. "I can sleep now." Almost as if that flicked a switch, the mummy stilled completely. For a moment, it was like looking at a statue until it began to fall backwards. It hit the carpet with a thud, a lifeless husk in a mildewed nightgown. All Lucy could do was stare. "She's gone," Syl said, voice husky and painful. "And it's gone." Lucy began to cry. Would you have been as brave as Lucy? I think I would probably have been in the next car out. Let me know in the comments. Our house used to be haunted, but she was a nice ghost and went on her way when she was satisfied. Please give the vid some love and like it using the thumbs up. And if you would be so kind, click that subscribe button and the bell icon. You'll never miss any content, and it really helps me and boosts the channel. It's totally free. Thank you so much. There is an extended ebook version, nearly twice as long, of the story on Amazon, etc. if you would like a copy to add to your collection. There is a link in the description, or scan the QR code on screen now. The Haunted House micro-stories from this week are also in the book, but don't forget to check them out on YouTube as well. Each is 1 minute of horror to chill your bones. As promised, here are the pretty kitties. Thank you for watching, and check out my other stories on screen now, or my link in the description for my other books and blog. I have a newsletter if you'd like some free books too.